How many times do I have to tell you? The words hit me like a physical blow, echoing through the kitchen where I once kissed scraped knees and celebrated first steps. My own son's voice, sharp as broken glass, cutting through 76 years of unconditional love. I'm standing here now, shaking, wondering when I became the burden instead of the blessing. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, please just leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep sharing these stories that need to be heard. My name is Helen Margaret Taylor, and I'm 76 years old. I live alone in a house on Maple Street in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where the autumn leaves are falling like the tears I can't seem to stop shedding anymore. This house used to pulse with life, Christmas mornings with wrapping paper scattered like confetti, birthday parties where my kitchen counter groaned under homemade cakes, summer evenings when my grandchildren's laughter drifted through open windows like music. Now it's silent, too silent. Most days I find myself talking to the walls just to hear a human voice, even if it's only my own. Every morning, I sit in the same faded blue armchair by the kitchen window, the one my late husband Jack bought me for our 30th anniversary. The fabric is worn thin where my hands rest, and there's a small coffee stain on the right arm from the morning Jack told me he loved the way I hummed while making breakfast. I still hum sometimes, out of habit, but the sound feels hollow now, like an echo in an empty cathedral. From this chair, I watch the neighborhood come alive. Mrs. Patterson walks her golden retriever, stopping to chat with young mothers pushing strollers. The Henderson family piles into their minivan for what looks like another soccer practice or piano lesson. Children ride bikes, couples hold hands, grandparents wave from porches as their families visit for Sunday dinner. I used to be part of that world. I used to matter. My son Brandon visits when he needs something, never because he wants to see me. His visits have become transactions. A check signed for his mortgage refinancing, documents notarized for his business, or my signature on papers I don't fully understand but sign anyway, because it's the only way he'll stay longer than 5 minutes. When he walks through my front door, he doesn't hug me anymore. He doesn't ask how I'm feeling or notice that I've lost 15 pounds since Jack died 2 years ago. His eyes scan the room like he's cataloging assets, and his phone buzzes constantly in his pocket, reminding him of the more important places he needs to be. "Can't you remember anything, Mom?" he said last Tuesday, when I asked him to repeat the bank routing number he'd rattled off too quickly for my aging ears to catch. His tone was the same one he'd used with his teenage son when Ethan forgot to take out the trash. Impatient, exasperated, like my inability to process information at his speed was a personal inconvenience. "Mom, we talked about this already," he sighed last Thursday when I asked about his work promotion, forgetting he'd mentioned it briefly 3 weeks ago during one of his hurried visits. He didn't explain that I might have forgotten because he'd been talking while rifling through my mail, distracted and distant, making it impossible for me to focus on his words when his body language screamed that he'd rather be anywhere else. But last Wednesday was different. Last Wednesday broke something inside me that I don't think can be repaired. I'd fallen asleep in my reading chair, the afternoon sun warming my face through the living room window, a book about gardening open in my lap. I'd been dreaming about Jack, about the tomatoes we used to grow together in our backyard garden, when Brandon's car horn jolted me awake. I heard his key in the lock, then his voice calling out with barely contained irritation, "Mom, move your car. My friend Dave is coming over to look at the basement and you're blocking the driveway." I struggled to orient myself, my arthritis making it difficult to stand quickly from the deep cushions of my chair. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I called out, my voice still thick with sleep. "Let me just find my keys." That's when he exploded. "How many times do I have to tell you?" Brandon's voice filled the house like thunder, harsh and unforgiving. "I told you yesterday that Dave was coming today. Can't you write anything down? Can't you remember one simple thing?" I stood frozen in my living room, car keys clutched in my trembling hands, staring at my 48-year-old son whose face was red with frustration and whose eyes held no trace of the love I'd seen there for decades. This was the same child I'd held through fevers and nightmares, whose scraped knees I'd kissed better, whose heart I'd helped heal through his first devastating breakup. This was the boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, who called me mommy until he was 10 and didn't care who heard him say it. Now I was just an inconvenience. A forgetful old woman who couldn't remember simple instructions, who moved too slowly, who needed explanations repeated, who had somehow transformed from his source of comfort into his source of frustration. The keys slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor Jack had refinished by hand 20 years ago. The sound seemed to echo through the house, and for a moment, we both just stared at them lying there between us like evidence of my inadequacy. Something cracked inside my chest, not my heart, because that would suggest something clean and quick. This was messier, like old wood splintering under too much weight, the slow deterioration of something that had been load-bearing for too long. I bent slowly to retrieve the keys, my knees protesting, and walked past my son without meeting his eyes. Outside, I moved my 12-year-old Honda Civic to the street, parking carefully between the painted lines because Brandon had once criticized my parallel parking skills. Through my rearview mirror, I watched a sleek black pickup truck pull into my driveway and saw Brandon emerge from my house with his business smile firmly in place, greeting his friend with handshakes and laughter that I hadn't heard him direct toward me in months. I sat in my car for a long time after they went inside, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, staring at the house where I'd raised 2 children and thought I'd grow old surrounded by family who loved me. The afternoon sun slanted through my windshield, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time Brandon had hugged me, or the last time he'd asked about my day without immediately checking his phone, or the last time he'd looked at me like I was his mother instead of his burden. That evening, after Brandon and his friend had left without saying goodbye, I sat alone at my kitchen table, where Jack and I had shared 37 years of dinners, and tried to understand when love had become obligation, when presence had become endurance, when I had stopped being someone worth treating with basic human kindness. The photo album sits heavy in my lap, its leather cover worn smooth by decades of handling. Each page tells a story of sacrifice they've forgotten, of love they've taken for granted, of a woman who gave everything and somehow became nothing in return. Here's Brandon at 6, gap-toothed and grinning, wearing the Superman costume I stayed up all night sewing because store-bought ones were beyond our budget. Jack was working double shifts at the factory then, and I was waitressing at Murphy's Diner, my feet swollen and aching by closing time. But seeing Brandon's face Christmas morning, watching him cape flowing as he ran through the house shouting, "I can fly, Mommy!" that made every dropped tip and rude customer worth enduring. I turned the page. Angela's 8th grade graduation photo stares back at me, her smile radiant in the white dress I'd found at a consignment shop 3 towns over. She'd wanted the expensive one from Miller's department store downtown, the one with the pearl buttons and silk sash that cost more than our grocery budget for a month. So I worked extra shifts, picked up catering jobs on weekends, and drove 40 miles every Saturday for 6 weeks, hunting through secondhand stores until I found something beautiful enough for my daughter's special day. "It's perfect, Mom," she'd whispered that morning, smoothing the fabric with reverent fingers. "It's exactly what I wanted." But last month, when I mentioned that dress during one of our rare phone calls, Angela's voice went flat. "I don't really remember much about 8th grade," she said dismissively. That was so long ago, as if the memory of her happiness was just clutter to be discarded, as if my months of sacrifice were footnotes in a story she'd rather forget. I flipped through more pages, each one a testament to choices made in love that somehow became evidence of my irrelevance. Brandon's college fund. I'd sold my grandmother's wedding ring to help pay his tuition, telling him it was insurance money when he asked. The ring had been the only thing of value I'd inherited, a delicate band with tiny diamonds that caught the light like stars. Jack had been laid off that winter, and Brandon's scholarship only covered half his expenses. "Are you sure, Helen?" Jack had asked, watching me wrap the ring in tissue paper. "Your grandmother meant for you to keep that. Grandma would understand," I'd said, though my hands shook as I placed it in the jewelry store's envelope. "Education is forever. This is just metal and stones." Brandon graduated summa cum laude, went on to build his successful consulting firm, drives a BMW that costs more than Jack and I made in 3 years combined. But when I mentioned the ring during one of his rushed visits, he frowned like I was making up stories. "You sold jewelry for my college?" Mom, I had student loans. Everyone has student loans. He didn't remember because I'd never told him. I'd protected him from the weight of our sacrifice. Let him believe his education was his achievement alone. And now, that protection had become erasure. My love invisible, my choices forgotten, my worth diminished to whatever I could still provide. The hospital bills from Jack's final illness fill an entire shoebox in my closet. Even with insurance, the costs had been staggering. Experimental treatments, specialist consultations, the private room I'd insisted on so he could die with dignity instead of surrounded by strangers' grief. I'd mortgaged our house, drained our retirement savings, worked part-time at the grocery store even though my arthritis made standing painful, all so Jack could have every possible chance and every possible comfort. Brandon had visited twice during those 6 months. Angela had come for the funeral, stayed 3 days, then flew back to Portland with promises to stay in touch more. Neither had offered to help with expenses. Neither had asked how I was managing financially. They'd inherited nothing because there was nothing left to inherit. I'd spent it all on love, on hope, on the desperate belief that keeping their father alive was worth any price. You should have asked for help, Mom, Brandon said when I finally mentioned the financial strain months after Jack's funeral. But his voice carried that familiar tone of mild irritation, as if my pride was an inconvenience rather than evidence of how little support they'd offered when I needed it most. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd raised them to be independent, to solve their own problems, to never ask for help unless absolutely necessary. I'd been so successful that they couldn't recognize when their mother was drowning in debt and grief, when the woman who'd always been their safety net needed saving herself. My phone rings, jarring me from memories that feel both precious and poisonous. Brandon's name appears on the screen, and my heart does that pathetic little leap it always does, hoping this time might be different, that this call might be about love instead of logistics. Hey, Mom. His voice is already moving at business speed, efficient and impersonal. I need you to sign some documents for the property tax appeal. Can I swing by tomorrow around 2? Not, how are you feeling? Not, what did you do today? Not, I was thinking about you. Just another task to be completed, another signature to be obtained from the woman who'd once been the center of his universe. Of course, sweetheart, I hear myself saying, the word sweetheart hanging in the air like a relic from a time when it meant something. Will you have time for coffee? I bought those cookies you used to like. I'll probably be in a rush, he interrupts, and I can hear him typing on his laptop while we talk, my invitation already forgotten. Rebecca has a doctor's appointment at 3:30. Rebecca, his wife of 22 years, who treats me like an awkward, distant relative rather than the woman who helped plan their wedding, who babysat their children every weekend for 5 years, who gave them my grandmother's china as a wedding gift, because Rebecca had admired it during family dinners. Rebecca, who sighs when I call, who answers my questions with one-word responses, who somehow makes me feel like an intruder in conversations with my own son. She's never been openly rude. That would give me something concrete to address. Instead, she practices a subtle art of exclusion, scheduling family events without including me, making plans that somehow never have room for one more person, speaking about me in the third person even when I'm standing right there. Helen doesn't really like action movies, she'll say when they're discussing date night plans, though she's never asked my preference, and I've never expressed any opinion about action movies. Helen probably wouldn't be interested in the new restaurant, she'll add, making decisions about my interests that gradually become facts about my limitations. After 22 years of this death by 1,000 small cuts, I've learned that my presence in their lives is tolerated rather than welcomed, endured rather than enjoyed. I've become the obligation that interferes with their real relationships, the duty that prevents spontaneous fun, the reminder of aging and mortality that doesn't fit their vision of their dynamic, successful lives. My daughter-in-law has mastered the art of making me feel grateful for scraps of attention, while simultaneously making it clear that those scraps are more than I deserve. When she does include me in family plans, her tone suggests she's performing an act of charity, that my gratitude should be both immediate and excessive. We thought you might want to join us for brunch on Sunday, she said last month. the emphasis on thought making it clear this wasn't her preference. It's probably too loud for you, though. The kids will be there. The kids, my grandchildren who used to climb into my lap to hear stories, who called me Grams and asked for my famous chocolate chip cookies every visit, who now check their phones while I talk and exchange glances that suggest my conversation is as outdated as my furniture. I close the photo album and place it back on the shelf where it sits like evidence in a trial no one will ever hold. Proof of love that no longer seems to matter. Documentation of a life spent giving to people who've learned to take without thinking, who've forgotten that love requires acknowledgement to survive. Tomorrow, Brandon will come for his signatures. He'll stand in my kitchen for exactly the amount of time necessary to complete his business. He'll pocket the documents without really looking at me, and he'll leave with promises to talk soon that we both know are just politeness masquerading as affection. And I'll sit back down in my chair by the window, watching other families live the life I thought I'd built, wondering when my children stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a service to be maintained until it's no longer needed. Was I used? The question whispers through my mind like cold wind through an empty house, carrying the uncomfortable possibility that everything I thought was love might have been something else entirely. My 76th birthday passed like a ghost through an empty house, silent, unnoticed, leaving no trace it had ever existed at all. I woke that morning to the same view from my bedroom window, Mrs. Patterson's rose bushes blooming bright pink against her white picket fence, the mail truck making its methodical rounds, children walking to school with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. The world continued its rhythm, indifferent to the fact that 76 years ago, I had taken my first breath in this same town, in the hospital that's now a shopping center, delivered by Dr. Morrison, who also brought Brandon into the world decades later. I made coffee in the same cup Jack bought me for Mother's Day 15 years ago. Blue ceramic with "World's Best Mom" painted in gold letters that have mostly worn away from washing. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sipped lukewarm coffee alone at a kitchen table set for one, the silence so complete I could hear the refrigerator's hum and the tick of the wall clock that used to mark time between children's laughter and family conversations. By noon, my phone hadn't rung. No cards appeared in my mailbox between the electric bill and grocery store circulars. No flowers arrived from the florist shop where I'd ordered arrangements for countless birthdays, anniversaries, and celebrations for a family that had apparently forgotten my existence entirely. At 3 o'clock, I called Brandon myself. "Hey, Mom," he answered on the fourth ring, his voice distracted, muffled by what sounded like traffic and radio music. "What's up?" "I'm between meetings." "I just wanted to hear your voice," I said, the words feeling pathetic even as I spoke them. I couldn't bring myself to remind him what day it was. Couldn't bear to hear him scramble for excuses or fake enthusiasm he didn't feel. "That's nice, Mom. Listen, can I call you back tonight? I'm running late for a client dinner." The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me holding the phone like evidence of my own irrelevance. I sat there for 20 minutes, waiting for him to remember, waiting for recognition to dawn and guilt to drive him back to the phone with apologies and belated birthday wishes. He never called back. Angela's birthday text arrived 3 days later. "Hope you had a nice birthday." No phone call, no explanation for the delay. Just 7 words that felt more like checking an item off a to-do list than expressing love for the woman who had given her life. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've discovered that becoming invisible is a gradual process, like developing photographs in reverse. First, the fine details disappear, then the colors fade, until finally, you're nothing but an outline, barely perceptible against the background of other people's busy lives. Last Tuesday, I fell in my bathroom. Not dramatically. No broken bones or emergency room visits, just a simple stumble over the bath mat that left me sprawling on cold tile, my hip aching and my pride bruised worse than my body. I lay there for several minutes, not because I couldn't get up, but because I realized that if I couldn't, no one would know. No one would miss me at dinner. No one would wonder why I hadn't called. No one would notice my absence until the mail piled up, or neighbors complained about newspapers accumulating on my porch. The thought terrified me more than the fall itself. When did I become so expendable that my sudden disappearance wouldn't create even a ripple in anyone's routine? I started paying attention to the small cruelties, the microaggressions that had become so routine I'd stopped noticing them. Like when Brandon calls and immediately puts me on speakerphone, not because he's driving or multitasking, but because giving me his full attention feels unnecessary. I can hear him typing, shuffling papers, having side conversations with Rebecca while I talk, my voice becoming background noise in his more important life. Or the way Angela ends our phone calls with, "Well, I should let you go," as if she's doing me a favor by releasing me from a conversation I never wanted to end, as if my time is infinite and worthless while hers is precious and scarce. Last month, I spent 3 days in bed with the flu that turned into bronchitis, coughing so hard my ribs ached and my voice disappeared entirely. I called Brandon to let him know I wouldn't be able to sign the insurance papers he'd dropped off, explaining through painful whispers that I was too sick to hold a pen steady. "Can't you just try?" he asked, his irritation obvious even through my congested hearing. "I need these filed by Friday, and I don't have time to come back next week." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Do you need anything?" Not, "Should I bring you soup or medication?" Just frustration that my illness was interfering with his timeline, that my body had dared to fail when he needed my signature. I forced myself out of bed, shaking with fever, and signed those papers with hands that trembled from weakness and something deeper, the realization that I existed in their lives only as a function to be performed, a service to be maintained, a convenience that had better not become inconvenient. The loneliness isn't just about being alone. I've been alone since Jack died, and I've made peace with quiet evenings and solitary meals. This is different. This is being alone while surrounded by people who are supposed to love you, feeling invisible while standing directly in front of those who claim you matter to them. It's eating Christmas dinner at Brandon's house, while conversation flows around me like I'm a piece of furniture, occasionally addressed but never included, spoken to but not spoken with. It's watching my grandchildren's eyes glaze over when I try to share stories about their father's childhood, seeing them exchange those looks that say, "There goes Grandma again with her boring old stories." It's Rebecca making dinner plans in front of me for the family, a category that somehow includes everyone except me, though no one acknowledges the exclusion directly. "We're thinking about trying that new steakhouse next weekend," she'll say to Brandon, her voice casual, but her meaning clear. The invitation is not extended. My presence is not desired. My feelings are not considered worth protecting. And slowly, I've learned to protect myself by expecting nothing, by feeling grateful for scraps of attention, by making myself smaller and smaller, until I take up no space at all in their emotional lives. I stopped calling as often because my calls felt intrusive. I stopped sharing news about my doctor visits or neighborhood happenings because their glazed expressions made it clear my life was boring. I stopped asking about their plans because being excluded hurt worse than not knowing. I trained myself out of needing them, hoping that if I required less, they might offer more. Instead, the less I asked for, the less they gave, until our relationship became a transaction. I provided signatures, emergency contacts, and holiday hosting when convenient. They provided occasional phone calls, obligatory visits, and the minimal attention necessary to avoid looking heartless to outside observers. 3 weeks ago, I had my annual physical with Dr. Chen, the same doctor who'd cared for Jack during his final illness. As she checked my blood pressure and asked about my medications, she noticed something in my demeanor that my own children had missed. "Helen, are you getting enough social interaction?" she asked gently, her eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Depression in seniors often presents as isolation, and I want to make sure you're taking care of your emotional health as well as your physical health." The question broke something loose inside me, and I found myself crying in her office for the first time since Jack's funeral. Not the dramatic sobs of acute grief, but the quiet tears of chronic sadness, the kind that comes from being slowly erased from the lives of people you love most. "I just feel so unnecessary," I whispered, accepting the tissues she offered with the same gentle professionalism she'd shown when explaining Jack's prognosis. Like I'm bothering people just by existing. Dr. Chen sat down then, abandoning her usual efficiency for something more human. "Helen, you raised 2 successful children. You cared for your husband through his final illness. You've been a productive member of this community for 76 years. Your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it. But it felt like it was. It felt like I was disappearing a little more each day, becoming a photograph left too long in sunlight, my edges growing fainter until one day there would be nothing left but an empty frame where a person used to be. That night, I sat in Jack's old recliner and tried to remember the last time someone had looked at me with genuine interest, the last time someone had asked my opinion because they valued my wisdom, the last time I'd felt seen as a complete human being rather than a collection of needs and limitations. The answer scared me. I couldn't remember. The truth has a way of revealing itself when you're least prepared to handle it, like lightning splitting open a dark sky you thought was just cloudy. I discovered the depth of my family's deception on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when the autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter's approach. I was walking back from the pharmacy, my arthritis medication rattling in the small paper bag, when I nearly collided with Martha Hendricks outside the First National Bank. Martha had been Angela's high school friend, one of those relationships that faded after graduation but never entirely disappeared. She worked at the bank now, wore professional blazers, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd made something of her life in our small Iowa town. "Mrs. Taylor!" she exclaimed, her face lighting up with genuine warmth that I'd almost forgotten how to recognize. "How wonderful to see you. You must be so excited about Friday night." I paused, my mind struggling to connect her enthusiasm with anything in my quiet, predictable life. Friday night? "Angela's anniversary party at the Riverside Country Club," Martha continued, her voice bubbling with the excitement of someone privy to special events. 35 years. I helped arrange the flowers for the centerpieces. White roses and baby's breath, just gorgeous. She said it was going to be a magical evening. The paper bag slipped from my fingers, my arthritis medication scattering across the sidewalk like tiny white accusations. Martha immediately knelt to help me gather the pills, her face shifting from excitement to concern as she noticed my expression. "Oh my goodness, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I had seen a ghost. The ghost of my own relevance. The specter of a mother who existed only in her children's lives when convenient. My hands shook as I accepted the pills Martha had retrieved, though I wasn't sure if the trembling came from shock or the arthritis that seemed to worsen with each emotional blow. There must be some mistake," I managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Brandon told me they had to cancel because Rebecca was sick." Martha's face transformed from concern to something worse. Pity mixed with embarrassment. The expression of someone who'd accidentally revealed a secret they weren't supposed to know. "Oh, Mrs. Taylor, I'm so sorry. I assumed you'd be there." Angela seemed so excited when she ordered the arrangements. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea growing cold between my hands, staring at the phone as if it might ring with an explanation, an apology, some acknowledgement that a mistake had been made. But the silence stretched on, broken only by the tick of the wall clock and the occasional car passing on Maple Street. I replayed the conversation with Martha dozens of times, searching for some misunderstanding, some innocent explanation for why my daughter was celebrating her wedding anniversary at the most exclusive venue in town while telling me the event had been canceled. The Riverside Country Club wasn't a spur-of-the-moment choice. Reservations there required months of planning, deposits, coordination with caterers and florists like Martha. This had been planned for a long time, and I had been deliberately excluded from the beginning. By Thursday, the weight of knowing had settled into my chest like a stone, making it difficult to breathe normally. I found myself standing at my living room window, watching the street for signs of preparation, for flower delivery trucks or catering vans that might give me clues about an event I wasn't invited to attend. Brandon called that afternoon, his voice carrying its usual brisk efficiency. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in about tomorrow night. Rebecca's still feeling under the weather, so we're definitely staying in. Probably just soup and Netflix, you know how it is." The lie came so easily, delivered with such casual indifference, that I wondered how many other deceptions I'd swallowed without question over the years. How many family gatherings had happened without me? How many celebrations had I been excluded from while being told comforting falsehoods about canceled plans and scheduling conflicts? That's too bad, I heard myself saying, playing my assigned role in this elaborate charade. I hope she feels better soon. Yeah, thanks. Well, I should go. Got a conference call in 5 minutes. The line went dead, leaving me holding the phone like evidence of a crime I couldn't quite name. Not fraud exactly, but something equally devastating. The systematic erasure of a mother from her children's significant moments, the careful construction of a family narrative that had no room for the woman who'd made it all possible. Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of perfect October evening that made you want to sit on porches and drink wine while watching sunset, paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Instead, I found myself driving across town in my 12-year-old Honda, following a route I hadn't taken in years toward the Riverside Country Club, where my daughter was celebrating a milestone I'd helped make possible. I didn't plan to go inside. I wasn't even sure why I was there. Perhaps to confirm what I already knew, to witness my own exclusion, to understand exactly how thoroughly I'd been written out of their story. The country club sat on a hill overlooking the Cedar River, its Georgian colonial facade lit by elegant landscape lighting that made the brick walls glow warm and welcoming. Luxury cars filled the circular drive, BMWs and Mercedes-Benzes and sleek SUVs that cost more than I'd ever spent on anything except my house. Through the tall windows, I could see the golden glow of chandeliers and the movement of people in evening wear, celebrating something important enough to warrant this level of expense and ceremony. I parked across the street in the shadows of an old oak tree, feeling like a stalker, a pathetic old woman spying on a life that had moved on without her, but I couldn't leave. Some masochistic part of me needed to see exactly what I'd been excluded from, needed to understand the magnitude of their deception. Brandon's BMW sat in the front row, polished and gleaming under the security lights. Angela's husband's Lexus was parked nearby, and I recognized several other vehicles belonging to extended family members and longtime friends. My grandchildren were there. I could see Ethan's beat-up Jeep in the back row, the one he'd bought with money from his summer job, refusing my offer to help with the down payment because, "Grandma, you've done enough for our family already." Through the large windows, I watched my daughter dance with her husband, her dress a shimmering blue that caught the light as she moved. She looked radiant, joyful, surrounded by people who loved her enough to celebrate this milestone with expensive gifts and heartfelt toasts and the kind of attention that made someone feel valued and important. Brandon stood near the bar, laughing with his cousins, a champagne flute in his hand and his arm around Rebecca, who looked nothing like someone recovering from illness. She wore a black cocktail dress and heels that suggested she'd been planning this outfit for weeks, not lying in bed with the flu as Brandon had claimed. And there, at a corner table, sat my grandson Ethan, looking uncomfortable in his dress shirt and tie, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the entrance as if he was expecting someone who wasn't coming. Every few minutes he would check his phone, and I wondered if he was texting me, if he'd noticed my absence and was trying to reach the grandmother who'd been told this celebration didn't exist. I watched for nearly an hour, cataloging every detail of the evening I'd been banned from attending, memorizing faces I'd known since childhood, noting the expensive floral arrangements and multi-tier cake and live string quartet that had been hired to provide ambiance for a night that was important enough to justify this level of expense, but not important enough to include the woman who'd raised the couple being celebrated. The cruelest part wasn't just the exclusion, it was the elaborate lie, the careful coordination required to keep me ignorant, the family-wide conspiracy that had protected everyone's comfort except mine. Someone had to remind Angela not to mention the party around me. Someone had to coach Brandon on his story about Rebecca's illness. Someone had to make sure I wouldn't accidentally discover the truth through social media posts or casual conversation with mutual friends. They'd put more effort into hiding this celebration from me than they'd put into including me in their lives for months. As I sat in my car, watching my family celebrate without me, I finally understood with devastating clarity that I wasn't just being taken for granted. I was being actively managed, carefully excluded, systematically erased from the moments that mattered most. They didn't want me there. They'd rather lie than include me. They'd rather hurt me than accommodate me. And somehow, That realization was almost liberating, because for the first time in months, I wasn't wondering if I was being too sensitive or asking for too much. I wasn't questioning my own perceptions or making excuses for their behavior. I was simply, finally, awake to the truth of what my life had become. When I drove home that night, I didn't cry. I didn't call to confront them. I didn't plan dramatic gestures or emotional ultimatums. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and, for the first time in my 76 years, began to seriously consider what it might mean to stop being the person everyone else needed me to be and start being the person I'd forgotten I was. The morning after I watched my family celebrate without me, I woke up different. Not transformed, that would come later, but fundamentally altered, like a house after an earthquake where everything looks the same, but nothing sits quite level anymore. I made my coffee in the same blue cup, sat in the same chair by the kitchen window, watched Mrs. Patterson walk her golden retriever down the same street I'd observed for decades. But something had shifted during the night. Some internal mechanism that had kept me compliant and grateful and small had finally broken under the weight of accumulated betrayal. The phone rang at 9:30. Brandon's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in years, I considered not answering. My finger hovered over the decline button while I imagined what that simple act of refusal might feel like, what power might exist in unavailability, in making someone else wait for once. But habit won out, as it usually did. "Hello, sweetheart." "Hey, Mom." His voice carried that familiar briskness, the tone of someone conducting business rather than connecting with family. "Listen, I need you to co-sign some paperwork for my business loan renewal. The bank wants an additional guarantor, and since you still have equity in the house, it would really help my credit rating." I sat silent for a moment, processing not just his request, but the casual assumption behind it, that my financial security existed to support his convenience, that my signature was available whenever he needed it, that my answer would automatically be yes, because it always had been before. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked, though I'd never questioned his financial requests in the past. Had signed whatever documents he placed in front of me because he understood money better than I did, because I trusted him, because saying yes felt like the only way to remain useful in his life. Just standard bank stuff. Guarantee documents, liability agreements, nothing major. His tone suggested mild irritation at having to explain, as if my curiosity about my own financial obligations was an unnecessary complication. "I can drop them by this afternoon. What happens if your business has problems?" The question surprised us both. I'd never asked about consequences before, had always assumed that Brandon's success protected everyone involved from risk. "Mom, what kind of question is that? My company's been profitable for 8 years. This is just a formality." But something in his defensive tone made me press further. "If something went wrong, what would I be responsible for?" A long pause, filled with the sound of his impatience. "Look, nothing's going to go wrong, okay? But theoretically, if there were issues, the bank could pursue collection from any guarantor. That's how loans work." The casual admission hit me like a physical blow. He was asking me to risk my house, the only security I had left, the only thing standing between me and homelessness, to guarantee a business loan for a son who couldn't be bothered to invite me to his sister's anniversary party, who lied to me about family events, who treated me like a convenient service rather than his mother. "I need to think about it," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth, foreign and rebellious. Another pause, longer this time. "Think about what?" "Mom, it's just a signature. I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. It's my house, Brandon. If something happened to your business, I could lose the only thing I have left. Nothing's going to happen to my business." His voice had taken on an edge now, frustration bleeding through his professional facade. "Jesus, Mom, when did you become so paranoid?" Paranoid. The word stung because it carried an implication that my concerns were irrational, that my newly awakened instinct for self-preservation was evidence of mental deterioration rather than long overdue wisdom. "I'll call you back," I said, and hung up before he could argue. I sat staring at the phone, my heart racing as if I'd just committed some terrible transgression. In 76 years, I couldn't remember ever hanging up on one of my children, Couldn't recall ever refusing a request without extensive apology and explanation. The silence that followed felt both terrifying and oddly liberating. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Angela. "Brandon says you're being difficult about his loan." "What's going on?" "Difficult." Another loaded word, one that suggested my hesitation was unreasonable, that my desire to protect my own financial security was somehow selfish or stubborn. They'd coordinated their response, presented a united front against my unexpected resistance, framing my caution as a character flaw rather than common sense. I typed and deleted several responses, each one beginning with apology and explanation, before finally settling on something that felt honest. "I'm reconsidering how I handle my finances." Her response came immediately. "This isn't like you, Mom. Are you feeling okay?" The question infuriated me more than Brandon's irritation had. "Are you feeling okay?" As if protecting my own interests was evidence of illness. As if self-preservation was a symptom of mental decline rather than a sign that I was finally thinking clearly. That afternoon, instead of waiting for Brandon to arrive with papers that would put my security at risk, I drove to First National Bank and requested a meeting with a financial advisor. Janet Morrison was a woman about Angela's age, with kind eyes, and the patience to explain complex concepts without condescension. "I need to understand what it means to co-sign a business loan," I told her, feeling foolish for not knowing, for having lived 76 years without understanding financial instruments that could destroy my stability. Janet walked me through the implications with gentle thoroughness, how guarantors became responsible for debt if primary borrowers defaulted, how banks could seize assets to satisfy obligations, how my house could indeed be at risk if Brandon's business encountered problems. "In general," she said carefully, "we recommend that seniors avoid co-signing loans unless they're prepared to make the payments themselves. Your fixed income and limited assets make this a particularly high-risk situation. But my son says his business is solid." Janet's expression remained professionally neutral, but something in her eyes suggested she'd had this conversation before. "Mrs. Taylor, even successful businesses can face unexpected challenges. Market changes, economic downturns, health issues, partnership disputes. There are many factors beyond anyone's control. The question isn't whether your son's business is currently successful, but whether you can afford to lose your house if circumstances change." The answer was obvious. I couldn't afford to lose anything, couldn't risk the little security I had left for someone who treated me like an inconvenience, who lied to me about family events, who seemed to value my signature more than my presence. Brandon called that evening, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Mom, I've been waiting all afternoon. When can I come by with those papers?" "I'm not going to co-sign your loan," I said, the words coming out steadier than I'd expected. Silence. Then, "What do you mean you're not going to co-sign?" "I mean no, Brandon. I can't risk my house." "Risk your house?" "Mom, you're being completely irrational. My business isn't going to fail. Maybe not, but if it did, I'd lose everything, and you'd lose nothing. I can't believe you're being so selfish." His voice had risen now, abandoning any pretense of patience or understanding. "After everything I've done for you, after all the times I've handled your paperwork and managed your affairs, you won't do this one thing for me?" Everything he'd done for me. The phrase hung in the air between us, exposing the transactional nature of our relationship more clearly than any argument could have. He'd handled my paperwork because it made his life easier to control my finances. He'd managed my affairs because it gave him access to my resources when he needed them. His help had never been about love. It had been about maintaining his influence over my assets. "I can handle my own paperwork from now on," I said quietly. "Fine." The word cracked like a whip. "But don't call me when you need help with something you can't understand. Don't expect me to drop everything when you have questions about insurance or taxes or any of the other things you've always relied on me for." The threat was clear. My value to him depended on my compliance, my place in his life contingent on my usefulness. If I stopped being accommodating, he'd stop being available. If I wouldn't risk my security for his benefit, he wouldn't provide the assistance that had made me dependent on him in the first place. "I understand," I said, though what I understood went far beyond his immediate threat. I understood that my relationship with my son had been built on a foundation of my giving and his taking, my accommodating and his expecting. I understood that love, real love, didn't come with conditions and ultimatums and threats of withdrawal. After he hung up, this time he was the one who ended the call abruptly, I sat in my living room and tried to remember when I'd last felt proud of myself, when I'd last made a decision based on my own needs rather than someone else's expectations. The memory that surfaced surprised me. I was 8 years old, standing in my grandmother's kitchen, refusing to eat liver and onions despite threats and bribes and lectures about starving children in far-off countries. I'd sat at that table for 2 hours, small and stubborn, and certain that I shouldn't have to swallow something that made me gag just to avoid disappointing adults. Eventually, my grandmother had made me a peanut butter sandwich, grumbling about spoiled children but respecting my refusal to be force-fed something I couldn't tolerate. When had I lost that ability to say no? When had I trained myself to swallow whatever was placed in front of me, regardless of how it tasted or whether it nourished me? That night, I slept better than I had in months. My phone stayed silent. No calls from Brandon trying to change my mind. No texts from Angela applying family pressure. No voicemails filled with guilt and manipulation and threats disguised as concern. Just silence. And for the first time in years, silence felt like peace rather than abandonment, like space to breathe rather than evidence of my irrelevance. I was learning that saying no didn't end the world. It didn't make me a bad person or a selfish mother or a paranoid old woman. It just made me someone who finally valued herself enough to protect what little she had left. The retaliation began the next morning with a phone call from Angela that shattered the peaceful silence I'd been savoring like morning coffee. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Her voice cut through the receiver with an intensity I hadn't heard since her teenage years, when every parental decision was a personal affront worthy of dramatic outrage. "Brandon told me you're refusing to help with his loan. Are you out of your mind?" I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it as if the device itself were responsible for the venom coming through the speaker. This was my daughter, the child I'd rocked through colicky nights, whose scraped knees I'd kissed, whose college tuition I'd helped pay by working extra shifts at Murphy's Diner. And she was speaking to me like I was a stranger who'd committed some unforgivable offense. "I decided it wasn't in my best interest," I said quietly, testing the strange new sensation of prioritizing my own needs without apologizing for them. "Your best interest?" Angela's voice climbed higher, incredulous. "Mom, it's Brandon, your son. He's not some stranger trying to scam you. He's family." Family. The word had once meant safety, unconditional love, people who protected each other from the world's cruelties. Now it apparently meant an obligation to sacrifice my financial security for someone who couldn't be bothered to include me in important celebrations, who lied to me about family events, who measured my worth by my willingness to accommodate his needs. "Being family doesn't mean I should risk losing my house," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the way my hands were shaking. "Risk losing your house? Mom, you're being paranoid. Brandon's business is successful. You know that." There it was again. Paranoid. As if my newfound caution was evidence of mental deterioration rather than belated wisdom. As if protecting myself was irrational rather than necessary. "Angela, what if something happened to his business? What if the economy changed or he got sick or there was a lawsuit? I'd lose everything." "Nothing's going to happen." Her exasperation crackled through the phone line. "God, Mom, when did you become so negative, so suspicious of your own children?" The accusation stung because it carried the implication that love required blind trust, that being a good mother meant never questioning my children's requests, never protecting my own interests when they conflicted with their desires. "I'm not being suspicious. I'm being careful. This isn't like you, Mom. You've always been supportive of our decisions. You've always been there when we needed you. Always been there. Always been supportive." The words revealed how they'd categorized me, not as a person with my own needs and limitations, but as a resource that should be consistently available, endlessly accommodating, perpetually willing to sacrifice for their benefit. "Maybe I've been too supportive," I said, the admission feeling both liberating and terrifying. A long pause. Then Angela's voice, colder now, more calculated. Are you having memory problems, Mom? Should we be concerned about your mental state? Because this sudden change in personality is really worrying. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. If I continued to resist their demands, they'd question my competence, perhaps even my legal capacity to make my own decisions. They'd frame my self-preservation as evidence of decline, my newfound boundaries as symptoms of illness. My mind is fine, Angela. I'm just finally using it to protect myself instead of enabling you. Enabling us? Her voice turned shrill with indignation. Mom, we're not drug addicts. We're successful adults asking for normal family support. Normal family support doesn't involve risking my housing security. You know what? Fine. Be selfish. But don't expect us to keep running over every time you need help with something. Don't call Brandon when you can't figure out your insurance paperwork. Don't expect us to drop everything when you have doctor's appointments you can't drive yourself to. The threats kept coming, each one designed to remind me of my vulnerabilities, my dependence on their occasional assistance, my need for the minimal support they provided in exchange for my much greater sacrifices. I won't, I said simply, though the words felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. She hung up without saying goodbye, leaving me holding a dead phone and wondering if I'd just destroyed the last remnants of my relationship with my children or finally begun to reclaim my dignity. An hour later, Rebecca called. My daughter-in-law had never initiated contact with me before. Our relationship consisted entirely of polite exchanges during family gatherings and stilted conversations when Brandon put her on the phone to fulfill some social obligation. Helen, she began, her voice carrying a false warmth that made my skin crawl. I heard about the situation with Brandon's loan, and I wanted to reach out personally. I waited, curious to see what approach she'd take, what manipulation tactics she'd employ to achieve what Brandon's anger and Angela's threats had failed to accomplish. I know this is a difficult time for you, she continued, her tone dripping with condescending sympathy. Loss of independence, confusion about financial matters. It's so common in seniors. But Brandon and I are really concerned about some of the decisions you've been making lately. Concerned about my decisions. As if my choice to protect my own interests was evidence of incompetence rather than the first rational thing I'd done in years. What decisions concern you, Rebecca? Well, this sudden suspicion of Brandon's business, for one thing. He's been successfully supporting our family for years. And then there's your isolation. You hardly call anymore. You don't seem interested in family activities. It's just not like the Helen we know, the Helen they knew. The compliant woman who signed whatever papers they put in front of her, who accepted exclusion with grateful silence, who measured her worth by her usefulness to people who treated her like a convenient appliance. Maybe you never really knew me, I said quietly. Helen, I think you might benefit from talking to someone, a counselor, or maybe your doctor. Sometimes changes in judgment can indicate underlying health issues that need attention. The gaslighting was so smooth, so professionally delivered, that I almost doubted myself for a moment. Maybe I was being irrational. Maybe my newfound resistance was evidence of decline rather than awakening. Maybe protecting my financial security was selfish rather than sensible. But then I remembered watching their anniversary celebration from my car. Remembered the elaborate lies they'd constructed to exclude me. Remembered Brandon's casual willingness to risk my housing security for his business expansion. My judgment is fine, Rebecca. In fact, it's better than it's been in years. I'm going to be honest with you, Helen. Her voice hardened, dropping the pretense of concern. Brandon is furious. He's seriously considering limiting your access to the grandchildren if you can't be more supportive of family decisions. The threat hit me like a physical blow. My grandchildren, the few bright spots in my increasingly isolated life, the only family members who still seemed to enjoy my company, would be weaponized against me, used as leverage to force my compliance. You'd use the children to punish me for protecting my financial security? We'd protect our children from the stress of an increasingly difficult grandmother who's becoming unreasonable and suspicious. Difficult, unreasonable, suspicious. Every word designed to pathologize my resistance, to frame my self-protection as evidence of character defects that justified their punishment. After Rebecca hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time since the night I'd watched their party from outside. But these weren't tears of sadness or self-pity. They were tears of rage, of recognition, of grief for the relationships I'd thought I had, but had never actually existed. The phone rang again that evening. Ethan's name appeared on the screen, and my heart leaped with desperate hope that someone in my family still cared about me as a person, rather than as a resource. "Grandma?" His voice sounded strained, uncomfortable. "I heard there's some kind of family drama going on. What did they tell you?" A long pause. "Dad says you're being really difficult about helping with some business thing. Mom says you're acting weird and might be having problems." Problems. Even my 20-year-old grandson had been briefed to see my self-preservation as pathology, my boundaries as evidence of mental decline. "Ethan, do you think I seem different when we talk?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I mean, no? You seem like yourself. Maybe a little sadder lately, but not weird or anything. I'm not having problems, sweetheart. I'm just learning to say no when people ask me to do things that aren't good for me." "Oh!" His voice carried relief mixed with confusion. "That doesn't sound crazy." "It doesn't, does it? Grandma, are you okay? Like, really okay? Because everyone's acting like something terrible happened, but nobody will tell me exactly what." The concern in his voice was genuine, untainted by agenda or manipulation. Here was someone who cared about my well-being without expecting anything in return, who valued my presence without demanding my compliance. "I'm okay, Ethan. In fact, I think I might be better than I've been in a long time." "Good," he said simply. "I was worried. You know I love you, right?" The words hit me with unexpected force. When was the last time someone in my family had said they loved me without qualifying it, without attaching conditions or expectations? "I love you too, sweetheart. More than you know." After we hung up, I realized that this conversation, this simple exchange of affection without agenda, had shown me what family could be when it wasn't corrupted by manipulation and conditional love, and it made me more determined than ever to stop accepting less than I deserved from the people who claimed to love me most. 3 weeks after I'd refused to co-sign Brandon's loan, they staged an intervention. That's what Angela called it when she phoned to inform me that the family would be gathering at my house Sunday afternoon for what she termed a serious conversation about your recent behavior. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd appointed herself the family's chief administrator of my life, someone who believed she had the right to summon me to defend my actions in my own home. "We're all very concerned," she continued, her tone suggesting that my resistance to their demands was evidence of some pathological condition that required collective management. "Brandon thinks you might benefit from talking to someone professional about these sudden changes in your personality." Professional help. The threat was clear. If I didn't return to my previous role as the family's accommodating resource, they'd question my mental competence, perhaps even pursue legal measures to strip away my autonomy entirely. "What time?" I asked, surprising myself with how calm I sounded despite the way my heart was racing. 2:00. "We'll bring lunch so you don't have to worry about hosting." Even in planning their assault on my independence, they couldn't resist the subtle insult, implying that preparing a simple meal had become beyond my capabilities, that hosting my own family in my own home was now too much responsibility for my allegedly declining mind. That Sunday morning, I dressed carefully in my navy blue dress, the same one I'd worn to Jack's funeral, the one that made me feel dignified and strong. I arranged the living room furniture to face the couch where I planned to sit, creating a subtle psychological advantage by positioning myself as the fixed point around which their arguments would have to revolve. They arrived exactly at 2:00. Brandon and Rebecca, Angela and her husband David, and, to my surprise and disappointment, Ethan, looking uncomfortable in khakis and a button-down shirt that suggested he'd been coached about the seriousness of this occasion. Brandon carried a bag from an expensive delicatessen downtown, the kind of place that charged $20 for sandwiches that cost $3 to make at home. Even their gesture of bringing lunch felt like a demonstration of their superior resources, their ability to purchase things I couldn't afford while asking me to risk what little I had for their benefit. "Hi, Mom," Angela said, kissing my cheek with the mechanical affection of someone fulfilling a social obligation. "You look nice." "Thank you," Please sit down. They arranged themselves on my furniture like a tribunal. Brandon and Rebecca on the couch directly across from me. Angela and David flanking them in the wingback chairs Jack had bought at an estate sale 30 years ago. Ethan perched uncomfortably on the piano bench, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Rebecca opened her purse and withdrew a legal pad covered with notes, as if this were a board meeting rather than a family conversation. The sight of those prepared talking points made my stomach clench with the realization that they'd planned this ambush carefully, probably rehearsed their arguments, coordinated their approach to overwhelm my resistance through sheer numbers and pressure. "Mom," Brandon began, his voice carrying the patient tone people use when addressing children or the mentally impaired. "We're here because we love you, and we're worried about some of the decisions you've been making lately." "What decisions worry you?" "Well, refusing to help with my loan, for starters." He glanced at Rebecca, who consulted her notes before nodding encouragingly. "It's just not like you to be so uncooperative when family needs help." Uncooperative. Another word designed to pathologize my self-preservation, to frame my refusal to risk my housing security as a character flaw rather than common sense. "I'm not being uncooperative. I'm being careful with my finances." "But Mom," Angela interjected, leaning forward with an expression of exaggerated concern, "you've never been this suspicious of us before. You've always trusted our judgment about financial matters." Maybe I trusted too much. The room fell silent for a moment, my words hanging in the air like an accusation none of them wanted to acknowledge. Rebecca cleared her throat and consulted her notes again. "Helen, we've all noticed changes in your behavior over the past few months," she said, her voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. "Increased isolation, paranoid thinking, resistance to family support. These can be early signs of cognitive decline that require professional evaluation." Paranoid thinking, resistance to family support. They'd pathologized every aspect of my newfound self-respect, turned my boundaries into symptoms, my self-protection into evidence of illness. "What support have you provided that I've resisted?" I asked quietly. "We're always offering to help with your paperwork, your financial decisions," Brandon said, his tone suggesting this was obvious. "But lately, you've been pushing us away, acting like we're trying to take advantage of you instead of help you. Have you been trying to help me, or have you been trying to help yourselves?" The question landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples of discomfort that spread across their carefully composed faces. David shifted in his chair. Rebecca's pen stopped moving across her legal pad. Even Ethan looked up from his phone, sensing that something significant had just been said. "That's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking we're talking about," Angela said, her voice sharp with defensive anger. "We're your children, Mom. We love you. Everything we do is for your benefit. Is that why you lied to me about your anniversary party?" The silence that followed was deafening. I watched color drain from Angela's face, while Brandon's expression shifted from patronizing concern to something closer to panic. Rebecca's carefully prepared notes suddenly seemed inadequate for a conversation that had veered away from their scripted talking points. "How did you—" Angela began, then stopped, realizing that completing the question would be an admission of guilt. "I know about the party, Angela. I know you celebrated your 35th anniversary at the Riverside Country Club while telling me it was canceled because Rebecca was sick. I know you all coordinated your lies to keep me away from your celebration." "Mom, that's not—" Brandon started, but I held up my hand to stop him. Don't lie to me anymore. I saw the party. I sat in my car across the street and watched my family celebrate without me while you told me it didn't exist." The room erupted in overlapping voices, Angela trying to explain, Brandon attempting to justify, Rebecca consulting her notes as if they contained responses to this unexpected confession. Only Ethan remained silent, his face pale with what looked like genuine shock. "You weren't invited because we knew you'd find something to complain about," Rebecca said finally, her mask of concern slipping to reveal the contempt underneath. "You always make everything about yourself, always find ways to be hurt or offended. We wanted one evening without drama." "Drama," I repeated quietly. "Is that what you call wanting to be included in my own daughter's milestone celebration?" "You would have worn something inappropriate," Angela said, her voice brittle with defensive anger. You would have told embarrassing stories about our childhood. You would have made it awkward for our friends. Each accusation was a small knife, designed to cut away at my dignity, to make me feel ashamed for wanting basic inclusion in my children's lives. They were telling me that my presence was an embarrassment, that my love was an inconvenience, that my desire to celebrate with them was evidence of selfishness rather than natural maternal affection. So you decided it was easier to lie to me than to include me. We decided it was easier than hurting your feelings, Brandon said, though his tone suggested he now regretted that consideration. Lying to me hurt my feelings. Excluding me hurt my feelings. Treating me like I'm too pathetic to handle the truth hurt my feelings. I stood up then, moving to the mantelpiece where Jack's photo sat beside the only picture I had of all my grandchildren together. A snapshot from Christmas 3 years ago, back when they still seemed happy to see me. You want to know what's changed about me? I turned to face them, drawing strength from Jack's familiar smile in the photograph. I've stopped pretending that your cruelty is kindness. I've stopped making excuses for your selfishness. I've stopped accepting crumbs and calling them a feast. Mom, you're being dramatic, Angela said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? You excluded me from a major family celebration and lied about it. You asked me to risk my house for a business loan and called me paranoid when I refused. You're threatening to keep my grandchildren away from me if I don't comply with your demands. Which part of that is dramatic? I walked to my desk and withdrew the folder I'd prepared that morning. Bank statements, property documents, insurance papers that I'd organized with Janet Morrison's help at the bank. Since you're so concerned about my mental state and my financial decisions, let me show you exactly what those decisions have been. I spread the papers across the coffee table, watching their expressions change as they recognized official bank letterhead and legal documents. I've transferred all my accounts to my name only. I've updated my will. I've established a power of attorney that goes to someone who actually has my best interests at heart. Who? Brandon demanded, his face flushed with anger that had nothing to do with concern for my well-being and everything to do with his loss of control over my assets. Mrs. Eleanor Carter. The name meant nothing to them, which was exactly the point. Mrs. Carter was a retired teacher I'd met at the library, a woman my age who'd lost her own family to similar dynamics of exploitation disguised as love. We'd become friends over shared books and coffee, building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than financial convenience. A stranger? Rebecca's voice was shrill with disbelief. You gave power of attorney to a stranger? I gave it to someone who sees me as a person rather than a resource. This is insane, Brandon said, standing abruptly and beginning to pace. You can't just cut out your family and replace us with random people. I'm not cutting you out. I'm setting boundaries. I'm protecting myself from people who lie to me, manipulate me, and threaten my grandchildren's relationship with me when I don't comply with your demands. We never threatened, Angela began. Rebecca told me you'd limit my access to Ethan and his sister if I didn't support family decisions. What would you call that? For the first time since they'd arrived, Ethan spoke. You said that? His voice was quiet, but it carried a note of disbelief that made Rebecca shift uncomfortably. I said we'd protect our children from unnecessary stress, she replied defensively. By keeping them away from their grandmother because she won't co-sign a loan? The room fell silent again. Even Rebecca seemed to realize how her threat sounded when spoken aloud by someone without agenda, how cruel and manipulative it appeared when stripped of its careful packaging. I think you should all leave now, I said quietly. Mom, let's just calm down and talk about this rationally, Brandon said. But his tone suggested he was the one who needed to calm down, who was struggling to process the loss of control he'd taken for granted. I am calm, and I'm done talking. I'm done being manipulated. I'm done being treated like my only value is what I can provide for people who can't be bothered to include me in their lives unless they need something. So that's it? Angela's voice cracked with what might have been genuine emotion, though I couldn't tell if it was sadness or anger. You're just going to throw away our relationship over money? I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just refusing to keep paying for the privilege of being treated poorly by people who claim to love me. They left in a storm of accusations and threats. Promises that I'd regret this decision, warnings that I'd end up alone and forgotten if I continued down this path. Only Ethan lingered at the door, his young face troubled by revelations that had clearly shattered some of his assumptions about his family. "Grandma," he said quietly, "are you really okay?" "I'm better than I've been in years, sweetheart." "Good," he said. And for a moment, he sounded like the little boy who used to climb into my lap for stories. "You deserve to be happy." After they were gone, I sat in my quiet house and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The deep satisfaction of standing up for myself, of refusing to accept less than I deserved, of choosing my own dignity over their approval. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. 6 months later, I'm sitting in a cafe in downtown Cedar Rapids that I'd never been to before. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because for 76 years, I'd convinced myself that places like this weren't for people like me. The morning sun streams through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating my table where a real ceramic cup holds coffee that actually tastes like something worth savoring rather than just caffeine delivery. I'm wearing a dress I bought last week. Soft lavender wool that makes me feel elegant instead of invisible. Not expensive, but chosen for how it makes me feel rather than how little it costs, or whether it might offend someone else's sensibilities. My hair, which I'd worn in the same practical style for decades, is shorter now. Styled by a young woman at a salon who listened when I said I wanted something that made me feel alive again. "Helen?" A voice interrupts my peaceful morning, and I look up to see Martha Hendricks approaching my table, her face bright with surprised recognition. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look wonderful." It's true. I do look wonderful, but more importantly, I feel wonderful. There's a lightness in my step that wasn't there 6 months ago. A straightness to my posture that speaks of someone who no longer carries the weight of other people's expectations and disappointments. "Thank you, Martha. Would you like to join me?" She slides into the chair across from me, her expression curious and slightly concerned. "How are you doing? I heard there was some family tension after Angela's anniversary party. Small-town gossip travels fast. And I'm sure my family's version of events has painted me as the difficult elderly woman who inexplicably turned against her loving children. But I've learned to let other people's narratives exist without feeling obligated to correct them or defend myself against stories I didn't write. I'm doing very well, actually. Better than I have in years. That's wonderful to hear. Are things better with Brandon and Angela now? The question hangs between us, loaded with the assumption that family reconciliation should be my goal. That peace with my children is worth any price I might have to pay in dignity or self-respect. "We're not in contact right now," I say simply. "And that's okay." Martha's eyebrows rise slightly. In our generation, in our community, cutting contact with adult children is still considered shocking, evidence of failure on someone's part, usually the parents. But I've learned that some relationships cost more than they're worth, that love without respect is just another form of exploitation. Don't you miss them? I consider the question seriously. Do I miss the people who lied to me, manipulated me, excluded me from important events while demanding my financial support? Do I miss feeling invisible in my own family, walking on eggshells to avoid being labeled difficult or paranoid? I miss who I thought they were, I say finally. But I don't miss who they actually turned out to be. After Martha leaves, I sit alone with my coffee and reflect on the journey that brought me to this moment of peace. The first month after our confrontation had been the hardest, not because I doubted my decision, but because the silence was so complete, so absolute, that I sometimes wondered if I'd imagined having children at all. Brandon never called again. Angela sent one text 3 weeks after their intervention. "When you're ready to apologize and act like a normal mother, let us know." The message sat on my phone for 2 days before I deleted it, along with their contact information. Some bridges, once burned, aren't worth rebuilding. But Ethan, sweet, honest Ethan, had surprised me by showing up at my door 2 weeks after the family meeting, looking sheepish and carrying a bag of my favorite cookies from the bakery downtown. "I wanted to see how you were doing," he'd said, settling into Jack's old recliner like he belonged there. "And I wanted to apologize for being part of that. Whatever that was at your house. You don't need to apologize, sweetheart. You were put in an impossible position. I kept thinking about what you said, about being treated like your only value is what you can provide. And I realized I've been doing that too, only coming over when I needed something, or when Mom reminded me it had been too long since I'd visited. His honesty had been both painful and healing, an acknowledgement that even the relationships I'd treasured weren't as pure as I'd believed. But unlike his parents, Ethan had the emotional maturity to recognize the pattern and the genuine desire to change it. "What do you need from me to feel valued?" he'd asked, a question no one in my family had ever thought to pose. "Just your time," I'd said. "Not because you should visit your grandmother, but because you actually want to spend time with me." And he had. Not every week, not on a schedule that felt obligatory, but regularly enough that I knew he chose my company rather than endured it. He brought friends sometimes, young people who listened to my stories with genuine interest rather than polite tolerance, who asked questions about what life was like in the 1960s and seemed fascinated by answers that my own children had found tedious. Through Ethan, I discovered that being a grandmother could be about sharing wisdom and experience rather than providing services and financial support. That young people actually valued the perspectives of their elders when those perspectives were offered with respect rather than demanded as tribute to age and authority. My friendship with Eleanor Carter had blossomed in ways I hadn't expected. What began as a practical arrangement, having someone I trusted handle my power of attorney, had evolved into genuine companionship. We met for coffee twice a week, attended library lectures together, took day trips to nearby towns to explore antique shops and local museums. Eleanor had her own story of family exploitation, though hers involved a son who'd systematically drained her savings through a series of investment opportunities that enriched only him. She'd been estranged from her children for 3 years when we met, and her peace with that decision had been instructive. "People think you owe your adult children unlimited forgiveness and support because you gave birth to them," she'd told me during one of our early conversations. "But parenthood isn't a lifetime contract to be abused. It's a relationship that requires mutual respect to survive." With her encouragement, I'd begun to rebuild my life around my own interests rather than other people's needs. I'd joined a book club at the library, where intelligent women discussed literature with the kind of passion I'd forgotten was possible. I'd started volunteering at the local literacy center, helping adult learners improve their reading skills, work that felt meaningful in ways that signing my children's documents never had. I'd even begun to travel. Small trips at first. A weekend in Chicago to visit museums, a week in Colorado to see mountain scenery I'd only seen in photographs. But each journey taught me that the world was full of beauty and wonder that had nothing to do with family obligations or other people's approval. My house, once silent with loneliness, now hummed with activity that brought me joy rather than exhaustion. The book club met there monthly. Eleanor and I hosted dinner parties for the other volunteers from the literacy center. Ethan brought his girlfriend over for Sunday dinners, where conversation flowed naturally, rather than being forced through the mechanics of obligatory family interaction. The financial freedom I'd protected by refusing to co-sign Brandon's loan had opened possibilities I'd never considered. Without the constant drain of supporting adult children who could support themselves, I could afford small luxuries that made daily life more pleasant. Good coffee, fresh flowers, books without checking the price first. More importantly, I'd learned to say no without guilt, to prioritize my own needs without apology, to recognize manipulation disguised as love, and refuse to participate in relationships that diminished my worth. Last month, I'd received a call from a lawyer representing Brandon. He was asking me to reconsider my will, which now left everything to charities and friends rather than to children who'd treated my resources as their entitlement. The lawyer's tone suggested he found my decisions incomprehensible, evidence of some mental deficiency that might be legally challenged. "Mrs. Taylor," he'd said carefully, "your son is naturally concerned about your decision to disinherit your family in favor of strangers." "Mr. Patterson," I'd replied, "my son was naturally concerned about my decision not to co-sign his loan. His concern seems to be activated primarily by my refusal to provide him with financial advantages." The lawyer had sputtered something about family loyalty and natural inheritance, but I'd interrupted him with something Eleanor had taught me. "Sir, my money is my money. I earned it, I saved it, And I'll decide who deserves it based on who treated me with love and respect while I was alive to appreciate it. Now, finishing my coffee in this sunny cafe where I'd learned to treat myself with the kindness my family had never shown, I pull out my phone and scroll through the photos from my recent trip to Savannah. Eleanor and I had spent a week exploring historic districts, eating in restaurants we'd never heard of, laughing like schoolgirls at private jokes that developed over shared experiences. In one photo, we're standing in front of a beautiful antebellum mansion, both of us grinning like tourists half our age. My face in that picture shows something I'd almost forgotten existed: genuine happiness, unguarded joy, the expression of someone who's free to be herself without constantly monitoring other people's reactions. A text from Ethan pops up on my screen. "Dinner Sunday? Sarah wants to try making your pot roast recipe." I smile and type back, "I'd love that. I'll bring dessert." "Awesome. Love you, Grandma." "Love you too, sweetheart." The exchange is simple, uncomplicated by hidden agendas or unspoken expectations. This is what family can be when it's built on mutual affection rather than obligation, when love is expressed through presence rather than financial transactions. As I gather my purse and prepare to leave the cafe, I catch my reflection in the window and barely recognize the woman looking back at me. This Helen stands straighter, smiles more easily, wears clothes that flatter rather than hide. This Helen has learned that self-respect is not selfish, that boundaries are not walls but gates that open for those who deserve access. I think about the woman I was 6 months ago, hunched over in her kitchen chair, accepting crumbs of attention from people who saw her as a burden, signing papers without reading them, grateful for whatever minimal consideration her children offered while they planned celebrations she wasn't worthy to attend. That woman is gone. Not dead, but transformed, like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon that had become too small to contain her growing wings. Walking to my car in the afternoon sunshine, I realize I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm thriving. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all, that it's never too late to stop accepting less than you deserve, never too late to choose your own happiness over other people's convenience, never too late to discover that the person you've been waiting for someone else to value has been yourself all along. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever wondered if the people who claim to love you actually see you as a person or just as a source of support? Tell me in the comments if this story sounds familiar to you. If this message resonated with you, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the story that saves someone is the one they needed to hear at exactly the right moment. And your subscription helps make sure these stories reach the people who need them most.